So if I can hijack both your cognitive and emotional systems, you become a wood cricket, which we could talk about what that reference is if you want.
What's a wood cricket?
So the wood cricket is an insect that abhors water. It wants nothing to do with water. But when it is parasitized by a neuroparasite called the hairworm,
Oh, I've seen this.
right? The hairworm needs the wood cricket to happily and merrily commit suicide by jumping into the water, because that's the only way that the hairworm can complete its reproductive cycle. So once the hairworm hijacks the wood cricket's ability to think and to invoke its survival instinct, it erases its survival instinct, then it is owned by the hairworm. And so I use that principle to explain suicidal empathy.
Yeah, we've actually shown videos of that. It's very strange.
It's amazing.
The cricket really commits suicide. It jumps in the water, drowns, and the worm wiggles out of its body.
Exactly.
And that's how it's born.
Exactly. And
There's so many cases of that in nature.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And so the way that I originally had the epiphany to use the parasitological framework, so parasitology is it's just a study of host-parasite interactions. So a tapeworm is a parasite, but that parasitizes my intestinal tract. But a subfield of parasitology is neuroparasitology. Those are the parasites that need to go into your brain, altering your circuitry to suit their interests.
Including ideas.
And that's how I came up with the parasitic ideas of the parasitic mind. But in order to fully tell the story, I then had to say, but a lot of the mechanisms by which people seem to be completely hijacked in terms of their ability to think critically is really coming from an affective place. And so how can I explain that? And so what I argue in the book, and then we can drill down to endless examples if you want, I'm not saying that empathy is a bad thing. Because even though the book is just dropping, there's already been maybe 10 articles that have been hit pieces against the book, which of course it means people haven't read it yet, where they say, here comes the dark Jew who is trying to promulgate the idea that empathy is a bad thing. He's a neocon right-wing guy, an Elon guy, a Donald Trump guy. I'm not saying that empathy is bad. Empathy is actually a very important virtue to have. In order for you and I to have a meaningful conversation, I need to put myself in your mind and vice versa. That's called cognitive empathy, right? Theory of mind is something that typically autistic children fail on very early in life. That's how you diagnose them as being autistic. So there's nothing wrong with well-modulated empathy. The problem with empathy, like most things in life, is if there's too little or too much of it. Aristotle explained this to us thousands of years ago via his golden mean. If a soldier is not courageous enough, if he's cowardly, it's not good. If he's too courageous, he becomes a reckless martyr. That's not good. There's a sweet spot in the middle. I argue empathy follows exactly that rule. Too little of it, you're a psychopath. Too much of it, if it's hyperactive, if it is invoked in the wrong situations, toward the wrong targets, you end up with suicidal empathy.
Yeah, I don't even necessarily know if it's empathy at that point. It completely becomes illogical and ideological. You just subscribe to whatever the ideology says, and you ignore the reality. Like this man that pushed that guy in front of the train.
Right.
Like, this is a violent criminal, and he had been arrested numerous times, I think more than a dozen.
Right.
And it was very clear that there's something very wrong with this person. He probably shouldn't be just running free, victimizing people. There was another one where someone pushed this old guy down a flight of stairs into the subway and killed him.
Yeah.
Same situation, same kind of person that had been in and out of jail. Every one of these people starts off as a child. Every one of these people starts off as a baby. And I can only imagine what kind of household they developed in. I can only imagine what kind of abuse they suffered. I can only imagine what happened to them. And that's horrible. But once they reach adulthood and they start victimizing other people, we've got to do something as a society.
Exactly.
Now, I don't know what the tools are to rehabilitate a person like that, but I know that they're not being employed. There's not a whole lot of evidence of there's any successful program where they're taking a person like that and doing something with them that completely changes their personality and the way they interact with humans and releases them out in the world and they become a much better person than they used to be.
So I call them in the book, I call them blank slate felons, because if you remember the term blank slate, so in the parasitic mind, I talk about social constructivism. Everything is a social construction. It's the tabula rasa premise. We're born with empty minds, with no individual differences in our potentiality, and it's only our unique life trajectories and our unique patterns of socialization that end up making us who we become, which in a small sense, that's true. My life experience and yours is an indelible part of who we are as individuals. But there are individual differences that people are born with different proclivities eventually of committing crimes or of being NBA players or of being the next Einstein. It's a very hopeful message, though, to start with the blank slate premise.
Yeah, it's just not accurate.
Exactly. Because if you and I are both parents, I would love to subscribe to the idea that if only I knew the exact schedule of reinforcement of how to ensure that my child becomes the next Lionel Messi or the next Albert Einstein, he too can become that.
Right.
That's a lot more hopeful than thinking, you know what, I don't think my son has the morphological features that are ever going to make him to be the next NBA star. He's too short. He doesn't have the right athletic tools. And so it's easy to understand why people can be parasitized by these ideas. This person of color was born into a white supremacist society, so he's already been victimized by society. And for you to now punish him by having him, in the penal system, you're doubly punishing him. So shouldn't you give him a second chance? And by second chance, we mean 186 chance. That's part of suicidal empathy. But suicidal empathy doesn't even apply to only that. The victims of rape are suicidally empathetic towards their rapists. Can I share some of those incredible stories?
Sure.
So I start off in the book with an example from a Norwegian man who had been sodomized by a Somali migrant. Because the Norwegians are very kind and empathetic, they don't believe in long sentences, he served maybe, 3 years or 4, like a pretty short sentence for a rape of another man. When he was being released, he was going to be deported. The victim of that rape had this huge existential angst and guilt, because now that, Ahmad was going to be released back to Mogadishu, he wouldn't end up being able to maximally flourish like he should be. Well, our emotional system did not evolve to be empathetic toward our rapists. That would be an example of someone who's being suicidally empathetic. Another great example.
What happened in that case?
What in terms of whether he was deported or not?
Yeah.
I think, I don't want to misspeak, but I think he was deported to the screams and lamentations of his victim. There is a woman who was raped in Germany, and